Hey everyone, welcome to the 265th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have, I'm going to hope it's lightning fast show for you this week. We're going to be talking about Microsoft's proposed ethics for contact tracing. We're also going to talk a little bit about MIT's proposed ethics for contact tracing. We've got some surveillance light features coming to Amazon Ring, possibly. We've got the new Ring alarm that came out 2 weeks ago that we forgot to talk about. We've got a little bit of vulnerabilities on smart hubs, some of which are still outstanding. We've got a funny snafu in IoT land. We're going to do a quick take on Qualcomm's super low power NB-IoT modem. Got an option for all of you IoT wizards out there with Pis and excess capacity. Now you can do folding at home on those devices. Got smart swim goggles, a new blood pressure app, a slightly more sensitive Google, and an effort to save coral in honor of Earth Day. Plus, Kevin's going to talk about his experience doing some automations in Home Assistant. And we're going to hear from our sponsor, Calyx, talking about how ISPs are handling demand during the pandemic. We're also going to hear from this week's guest, Karen Herter, who is a Level 3 specialist at the California Energy Commission. She is going to talk to us about what California is doing to enable real-time pricing so we can actually have an electrical grid that is truly responsive and functions more like the internet does today. This is important because, holy cow, climate change, we need to move towards electrification. So stay tuned for that because I thought it was really interesting. But now it's time for a message from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is ALED Networks. ALED Networks is a leading provider of edge connectivity, device management, and application enablement for the Internet of Things. ALA enables the world's largest companies to connect any device on any cloud to any application. ALA has the fastest time to market, it's flexible and future-proof, it increases operational efficiencies, and enhances the customer experience. For more information, please visit alanetworks.com. That's AYLANETWORKS.com. Okay, Kevin, let's talk about ethics and contact tracing. Woo!
Yay!
Last week, we talked about Google and Apple getting together to do contact tracing anonymously via Bluetooth on their devices to build a framework for this. And we talked a lot about privacy. And I do think it's really important to have contact tracing for public health. But I also think it's important to say, hey, while we're in a panic and rolling all this stuff out, let's make sure we do this in a way that does protect the end users. And to that end, Microsoft actually this week released a list of privacy principles that it's throwing out there for governments, public health authorities, academics, and anyone else that wants to deal with tracking and tracing during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're not going to go into all of them. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. There are 7 of them. And I'm really impressed, actually. The blog post is written by Julie Brill, who was a former commissioner of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and actually oversaw it when they were doing a lot of IoT privacy-related things. So this is a really good list. It talks about obtaining meaningful consent, using the data only for public health, which we have talked about in previous shows. It talks about collecting the minimal amount of data, and it also calls for individuals to choose where their data is stored, which Kevin, I haven't actually talked about this at all, but that's a really interesting idea. The idea is data has to be under the individual's control, and they get to choose where to store the data. So if they want to put it on their device or in the cloud.
Yeah, that's not something that I've seen others put forth, but it is a good option to have. I mean, we buy devices and things, and we don't have a choice of where the servers are that are capturing data or using services and so on. So that's nice to see. They definitely added value with that one. The last one, I think, is the step forward over Apple and Google, in my opinion. And that's deleting data as soon as it is no longer needed for the emergency.
I agree. And again, that ties back actually to owning your own data. So once you have it, you keep it. And anything that was transferred to the public health authorities or others for track and trace just get deleted.
Boom.
Now, So I have a little bit of an issue. This is where I think that you should lock it away for a period of time, like a minimum of 2 years, possibly longer. And then I think you should actually make the data available for research. But to get access to it, researchers have to do like an IRB, an institutional review board process. Microsoft's just like, kill it all. So I could go, that is way more privacy protecting. So sure.
Yeah, I think these meet the immediate needs in a comfortable way. What you're suggesting would certainly be valuable, but I think that's a longer term approach.
Also, tied to this came out probably, I think 2 weeks ago now. MIT released what they're calling Safe Paths. It is their privacy-focused approach to contact tracing. I'll put a link to the show notes for this in here. It's using a different form of cryptography for basically securing the data and ensuring a match. And it's called split learning. I'm not going to go too much into this. I'm going to tell you that you should go read it. But for people who want to delve deeply into this, the point is we have to have contact tracing. We probably have to have people doing it, and we need the digital assist of phones, right? Because we don't have that many people to do contact tracing, and it's pretty laborious. And
the other thing is everybody is trying to implement a solution that meets everyone's needs. And even still, no one solution is going to do that. And I say that because earlier this week, there was a report that the French government said, hey, this Apple and Google Bluetooth thing, it's not good. It doesn't meet our standards.
Right. It'd be awesome if everything could work together because this is a global pandemic.
Yep.
But we may not get to that. But hopefully we can get things that work for most of the people most of the time. And we have to ensure robust privacy to get people to actually download this because everything's opt-in. And if you don't get, it's like a 60% rate of opt-in, which is incredibly high. We're not going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So, for deeper dives on that, check out the show notes. All right. Speaking of, let's just call it surveillance because it's surveillance in the name of public health. So let's talk about surveillance in the name of profit.
Perhaps. There were some leaked poll questions from Ring, which is owned by Amazon. Guess it's asking customers, what's most important? What features are important to you? What's least important? And some of these, or actually many of these features are things that like I have on my Nest Hello doorbell, such as familiar face detection and unfamiliar face detection, etc. But hidden in here, among the, I'd say, dozen questions is car pull-in detection, which I think could be interesting, but then there's license plate detection. And that's worrisome to many people only because of the whole, I'll call it public-private police fiasco relationship that Ring has had in the past several months.
Yeah, license plate detection, license plate readers have been a scourge for, we'll call it civil rights. In a lot of places, we saw these being rolled out a few years back, and they were rolled out by police departments who then could use it to track cars. It feels kind of unreasonable search and seizure in the sense that police officers can use these cameras that have license plate detection to really find people very easily using computers as opposed to walking around and, get them for small fines, for big crimes. I mean, big crimes, it makes more sense, but you don't have to have a warrant for this. So you can do it for a lot of things. ICE has been using it. Even neighborhood HOAs are buying them now. So HOAs are buying them now. And
don't tell my HOA that, please.
Yeah. And they're using it to like detect people who spend too much time in the neighborhood and
they tell me I already do that.
Yeah, well, now maybe here. Less. There's a lot there that feels a little dicey. Maybe you don't want to give that kind of level of surveillance power to maybe even your neighborhood busybody.
What would you as a homeowner want it for example? Like, would you want to know if there's a car that keeps coming through that doesn't live there or something?
I'm guessing that's sure. What they want. Like, if this car has driven by so many times. I mean, because like, it is a way to determine which car has driven into, so it's like identifying a person, but you could do that with, a red car, or maybe that feature just isn't available if you have two red cars, right? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I assume that's why you would want it, because then it says, hey, this particular car has driven in, and you know that's your kid's car or whatever.
Yeah, there's other ways to do that better, I think, with GPS and geofencing and so on, but whatever.
But Ring also has something else on the table. They also have a second generation security system that is out. It will cost $199, and it is a keypad, a contact sensor, a motion sensor, and a range extender. I feel like there's one more piece. Is there one more piece in there, Kevin?
The base station?
Yes. Hello.
The brains?
The brains of the operation. And basically, these are tiny tweaks. It's about the same as the original version in terms of price, but now they've added dedicated buttons for police, fire, and medical assistance from the on the keypad. They have one-touch modes that make it easier to say, hey, I'm going away, disarm, etc. I don't think you need to replace your old one, but if you are still looking at this, it is a really inexpensive alarm system. It's much cheaper than the alternative Nest. I would say that more people seem to be happier if they are like hardcore IoT people using something like Abode or SimpliSafe, just because with Abode, you can actually work with some other smart home systems. But you know, if you're all in on Ring and Amazon, then, you know, this is kind of a no-brainer, I would think.
Yeah, and the base kit is the $199.99 for those 5 pieces. They have a 8, 10, and 14-piece kits available that add more sensors and detectors and such.
More sensors. All right. Also, in security, we've got a little bit of insecurity. Some smart home IoT hubs are vulnerable to remote code execution attacks, which are bad because that means they can send you stuff over the internet and affect the operation of your home hub.
And we're seeing more of these types of stories come out now that since we have shelter in place going on and more people working from home. So now all of a sudden everybody's talking about all these vulnerabilities because more people are at home. This is actually an old one from 2018 and it impacts 3 different hubs. The Fabaro Home Center Lite, EQ3's Homematic Central Control Unit, and Elco EP's ELAN RF003, which I'm not familiar with those latter 2. But many of the issues here, and the issues have ranged from remote code execution, which is very, very bad, data leaks, and man-in-the-middle attacks. A lot of these have been fixed, but not all of them. And in fact, like the Fabaro Home Hub, it still has an issue. They say there's a hard-coded salt string, and that's still being used to create some of the password hashes. So perhaps somebody can figure out the password to access the Fabaro hub. So that's not good. Unfortunately, if there's no fix, you can't really do much about it.
Yeah, no, that's a replace the hub kind of fix right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Here is a slightly amusing IoT story. I mean, it's not amusing because it's a terrible thing to... The rationale behind this is not awesome, but I'm gonna see it as mildly amusing and a good tale of caution for everybody setting up an IoT server. Sharp saw some of its connected appliances in Japan, including air conditioners,
in the summertime.
Well, it's spring.
Almost.
Become disabled. And the reason is because that was somehow tied to a server that was also linked to Sharp selling face masks. So Sharp was trying to be a good citizen and offer face masks to customers. They expected to sell 3,000 boxes a day, 1 per customer from the news site. But people came in droves to buy face masks, and apparently somehow that triggered something that caused some of their smart devices to go offline. And yeah.
Yeah, you got to load balance and use more servers, guys.
Well, this is where maybe, totally separating your IoT platform out, maybe using a third-party vendor that only does that might make sense. I don't know. But I will say also on the face mask side, Wise is offering face masks, boxes of 50 for customers for, I think it's $29.99. They're not medical grade face masks, by which I mean they're not like N95 face masks. They're the traditional surgical masks. So they're not going to block virus particles. If you get spit on you, they'll block the spit. Yeah. The virus might still get through, but it's better than nothing.
They're also selling a smart thermometer as well.
They are. And we had David Crosby last week or the week before on the show talking about kind of why they did that. They were like, hey, we've got really powerful sourcing relationships. Let's use them to help our customers.
Nice.
All right. Let's talk about my favorite topic, chips. And queso. No, this is Qualcomm last week introduced an NB-IoT chipset that only needs 1 microamp of charge when it is in sleep mode. That is crazy low. This is going to enable you to have batteries that could last for like 10 to even up to 15 years. And this is impressive. This is the 212 modem for NB-IoT. If you guys, I'll give you the quick refresher. NB-IoT is a low-powered wide area network, so tiny bits of data over long distances, and NB-IoT is the cellular flavor of this. It's going to compete with things like, LoRaWAN, Sigfox, probably other options I'm just forgetting right now. And yeah, I just thought this was a really cool development because, again, low power is important. I will say I am a little bit worried about pricing. NB-IoT is a tough nut to crack. And we'll talk more about that with like business models and such in some later stories coming out, because I don't think people are aware of how much, these modems cost money, the networks themselves cost money. And even if you're going to sell data access on a device for like $1 a month, which feels relatively cheap, right, Kevin?
It does, but when you look at how much data you're actually sending for that dollar, it's probably very expensive, like on a per kilobyte.
Yeah, per byte basis. That right. And the goal of NB-IoT, the vision is you put this in like smoke detectors and trackers and all kinds of things. But if you do that, every time you sell one of these, and especially if you sell one with a 15-year battery life, you're looking at paying $1 a month for the next, 15 years. And I don't know how you make money on that, like how do you really, it doesn't seem like enough for the carrier to make money to make the network worth it. And it seems expensive for either the consumer or the company that makes the end product. Cause I don't think consumers are going to want to, $1 a month line item on their cell phone bill for their smoke detector.
Yeah. We'll check back in 2035 and see how all that went.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about, folding at home.
Yes, I do folding at home.
You do, yes, on a computer, right?
Yes, on a laptop.
On a laptop. But now you can do folding at home on tiny Raspberry Pis, Jetsons, Nanos, ARM-powered devices. And the reason you can do this is because of Balena. Or possibly Balena. We're not sure. This is a company that does containers, actually, for IoT, container management for IoT. And what they've done is they have allowed you to run folding at home and Rosetta at home on a Pi or basic ARM devices. So this works on your IoT devices.
Yeah, for people not familiar with the folding at home, it's a distributed analysis app similar to the SETI at Home project, if you're familiar with that. So I get research packets on proteins, and the numbers get crunched to see how the proteins fold in a simulation and so on, and then return the data back to the folding at home servers, for example.
Yes. Now, they will say that you're not going to be able to do as much on a Pi because you need kind of a lot of memory to run these simulations. But there are tiny little jobs that sometimes can be thrown off. So you're going to be doing those little tiny jobs, and your stuff may take forever to do that. But, if you've got some stuff that's not doing much, maybe load this software on there and see. We'll include a link to the show notes in there for everybody who wants to hack their Nest camera to do this. No, don't do that. In other fun, new products, new options out there for you, a company called Form. This is a Vancouver startup. They've raised $8.5 million US or 12 million Canadian to basically build augmented reality goggles for swimmers. And the idea is when you're swimming, this will track your, it's basically a heads-up display in your goggles while you swim. The founder that did this, he actually founded a company called Recon that was bought by Intel, and they actually put heads-up displays and AR displays in ski goggles for skiers.
I remember.
Yeah. I obviously have never tried these because I don't ski because I am from Texas, but I do swim, And apparently they think there's a market for this. And
I think this is a brilliant idea because if you're going to swim and wear goggles anyway, why not have statistics on how far you've swum and the time and other tracking bits that can be shown to you, right? You don't have to look at a wearable device. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah. And they're hoping to sell this device for $199, which is expensive, but it's not expensive if you're like a hardcore swimmer.
Right.
So there you go. Cool new IoT gadgets. Speaking of new IoT gadgets, this is an app, but it does tie to a gadget.
It is. Samsung Health Monitor has been approved, not in America, but by South Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, kind of like our FDA. This app has been approved by them to measure blood pressure on the Galaxy Watch Active 2, and it will be added to the watch in the third quarter of this year. So we don't see too many blood pressure smartwatches these days. So
when I was freelancing for the Wirecutter, I actually did a whole segment on smart blood pressure cuffs. And I think one of the reasons you probably don't see a lot on smartwatches or wearables like this is because to get an accurate read on blood pressure, you need to be sitting still for a minute before you take your blood pressure, and you need to be silent. So
yeah,
unless this is going to, like, they're going to run this right before you get out of bed, but you should be sitting up. So
they don't really say that it's limited like that, but I suspect it is. And there's another limitation. You have to calibrate it roughly every 4 weeks with a traditional blood pressure cuff.
Okay. But again, some of these things I feel are like useful. Some of them are going to just be like, hey, this is a trend, and maybe the trend bears merit. But so we'll see. The FDA actually probably 3 or 4 years ago got on a bunch of smartphone companies for trying to do blood pressure via the phone. So I'm always a little, but maybe it's just because I did that story and I feel like I know a lot about blood pressure cuffs. Okay. And in good news for Earth Day, which is the day we were recording this, by the time you hear this, it will be yesterday, which was yesterday. Intel and Accenture want you to know that they are using artificial intelligence to save coral reefs. Basically, they're just sticking fake reefs. They call them prosthetic reefs, which I kind of like. They drop them down there. The idea is you implant some coral in there. Coral's like, I like this. And they grow on whatever structure that you've dropped down there. What happens, the AI part of this, is they are using Accenture's Applied Intelligence Video Analytics Services platform to detect and photograph fish as they pass so they can classify marine life. And they basically know how the coral is performing, is not really the right, growing, without sending people down there to disturb everything.
Right. This reminds me of a similar project from Google that we talked about several podcasts ago, where they were using AI and image recognition, looking at the fish to kind of get a feel for the mood of the fish and were they healthy and so on, instead of, again, having somebody actually looking down there at the fish. I think the fish are more fun to watch than coral, but that's just me.
There's no fish there yet. So we'll throw that in there. The feel-good fish stories tag, I guess, is what we need to develop now. All right, Kevin, let's talk about your experience with Home Assistant, because you did some automation this week.
Yes. Now that everything has been set up and running, glitch-free, I might add, except for maybe like one minor issue on an update, I did spend a lot of time testing automations. And when I first started doing that a few weeks ago, it looked like I was going to have to go into configuration files, text files in what they call the YAML, YAML format. However, very recently, the Home Assistant folks have put out some upgrades that let you kind of do it like Samsung SmartThings does with cards for your triggers, your actions, your events, and so on, and a lot of drop-down menus. So it's so much easier than when I first looked at it a few weeks back. Even more interesting, it's actually powered in part by Almond, which is a Stanford project, open source, to have a virtual assistant that can parse natural language locally. So that way you don't have any data privacy issues. And the reason for it is because when you create an automation, Home Assistant says, what do you want to do? And you just put it in plain English. And what happens is the Almond service tries to basically parse out what you want and show you the appropriate options. So it's really, really cool. It doesn't work all the time, but it's very helpful. I'm just blown away by how much you can do. And I know Home Assistant people who've been using it are probably nodding their head saying, yeah, dummy, we've been telling you that for 2 years. And they're right. They're absolutely right.
Yes, but it's a lot easier now. So it's a lot. I mean, like,
it is.
I know that we have so many people who are very tech savvy in the audience, and we love you for that. But we also have people who are like less tech savvy.
Right.
And those people are like, no.
That is a concern. Home Assistant hasn't been approachable by the mainstream people as much, right? The techies get it, and that's awesome. And they can exploit the power to their advantage. And there's tons in here that I still haven't looked at or used. Like you can trigger MQTT messages. You can use webhooks as triggers. There's so much you can do. Custom notifications. But even just setting up the basics that most people would want, I think it's much easier now. Again, I basically say if you can think it, you can probably do it with Home Assistant automations. I mean, think of if this, then that without limitations and having it local and having like no latency. It's just probably the best summary I can give. And speaking of latency, this doesn't actually have anything to do with the automations. Before the show, what did you do?
I logged into your account remotely and
from 2,500 miles away.
Yes, I am in Bainbridge Island. There's even like
we don't recommend this. This was for testing.
Yes,
people.
this is because Kevin trusts me with access to his entire home. Mwah! But I clicked on a light and I turned it on, and it was like that.
Instant.
It was crazy.
I was blown away. In fact, I kept saying to Stacey, "You can't believe how fast this is." I had to turn on a webcam just to show her the light going on and off when she clicked something from Washington State to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it was ridiculously fast.
Yep.
So. And now I have access to Kevin's home again. Mwah! All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna fix that real fast.
And now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast Hotline. This is the segment of the show where we take a question from our audience and we try to answer it for you. And if you send us a question via phone, you can call us at 512-623-7424, or you can send us a question at questions@iotpodcast.com. And at the end of each month, we do a random drawing, and if we draw your question, then you will win a Schlage lock. Ba 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 ba. This is a very exciting prize. So call us at 512-623-7424, or send us an email with your questions. Now, this week's question comes to us from Steve. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacey and Kevin. This is Steve calling from Norfolk, Virginia. Longtime listener of your show. I hear you guys talking a lot about new routers coming out in Wi-Fi 6. I have an Almond router system in my home, and it's good, but it's kind of falling off. I feel like in certain corners I have 3 satellites in one base, and wanted to see if you guys knew the date of when you expect these Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6S, I believe you said on last week's show, when they might be hitting the market, if it would be late 2020 or early 2021.
Oh, Steve, this is a great question because it's going to be relevant for people going forward, and it's really easy to answer. Well, it's sort of easy. We don't have a lot of information about your house, so we can't tell you exactly what Wi-Fi router to buy. But we can tell you that Wi-Fi 6 routers are available today. For a mesh system, they range in price from about $300 all the way up to like $750. So it's a wide range.
And we haven't actually upgraded our personal routers. We've talked about this on the show in the past. We're kind of holding off until it makes more sense for us. But we have decent routers now. It sounds like you're ready to upgrade, so this makes sense.
Yes. Again, our little caveat on Wi-Fi 6 routers is if your current router is performing well, you don't need to update, especially for IoT purposes, because most IoT devices are not going to see much change or any change on.
Actually, very few devices at all will. It's just only now that some phones are getting Wi-Fi 6, for example.
Yeah. Some phones, laptops, gaming laptops, and computers. So that's all our legalese out of the way. But if you're like, oh, my router kind of sucks, you should totally buy a Wi-Fi 6 capable router because you're going to want to, in a couple of years, it's going to be really valuable to you. So we looked up a bunch of options. We're going to give you some options because we just don't know what you need. Kevin, you want to start off on the cheap end and I'll do the fancy end?
On the cheap end, although I'm surprised it's this cheap, is the TP-Link Deco X60, which is a 3 device mesh Wi-Fi system. They say on paper up to 3 gigabits per second over wireless, but that depends on if your device has Wi-Fi 6 or not and what other devices are there. But it covers up to 7,000 square feet, they say, up to 150 devices. And shockingly, the only place you can buy it right now is Costco. And Costco has it on sale right now for $329.99, which is, I think, ridiculously cheap for that.
That is ridiculously cheap. And these were shown off at CES, but TP-Link Deco did introduce like a lower end version that's slower.
Yeah.
It's called the X20. It was supposed to be out in March of this year. It isn't out yet, but hopefully we'll see it in the next couple months. So if you can hold off and you're really like, I don't know if I want to spend a lot.
I'm sure it'll be cheaper because that is up for about 5,000 square feet. And also the wireless is, while it's still tri-band, 1.8 gigabits per second.
Yeah. So are there any other at the less expensive end?
Well, you could go, well, it depends on what you say by less expensive. I was going to say ASUS makes their Zen Wi-Fi AX tri-band mesh system. It's a 2-pack and that's $450.
Okay. That's the mid-band.
Yeah.
So now we've got cheaper, more expensive, and now we're getting into the Rolls Royce of Wi-Fi 6 routers. And these are the Orbi Netgears. So I have not tried the Wi-Fi 6 version of the Orbis, but I did try the original Orbi mesh, and those things were powerful. And I will say that they've gotten excellent reviews for the Wi-Fi 6 capable routers. These is a 2-device system, but it will cover like a large home. Again, it kind of depends. I mean, these things have general information, but like if your home is like, if it's a 1-story home or multiple stories or has weird plaster walls, you're going to see some difference in performance. But Orbis, they just like tons of signal, great speed. And it is $700 for that 2-pack.
Ouch.
It is tri-band. They're very nice. The Netgear Orbi 6s is what they are. Okay. And it's speed for days. Another option that I'm going to throw out there, because everybody who listens to this show always emails us with their love affair of Ubiquiti. They have a lot of enterprise class features in, I'm going to call it an SMB router. It's not, most of their routers are not for consumer purposes.
Right.
But they do have something called the Amplify Alien. This is a brand new Wi-Fi 6 mesh router. It looks like Amazon Echo, except the ring on the bottom is yellow and it glows, from the bottom, not from the top. And it has a little tiny screen on it. So it's an interesting looking router. It's a little more subtle. It is available as a standalone router for $379, or it could be a mesh setup for $700. And this sucker is, well, it's a better design, I think, than the Orbis, but, we're here for performance, not necessarily design. It has a lot of the Ubiquiti features that you can mess with your networks in a way that's pretty cool. You can split off some of your networks here very easily. Setup is nice. Those are the ones we're going to recommend you look at depending on what you need and want to spend. I think those are excellent routers. With the exception of the Deco X20, those are all out on the market today. You can upgrade your Almond, which props to you. I had an Almond Wi-Fi router a couple years ago, and I actually loved that. That was one of the first mesh routers out there. The company that made it did a lot of really good work in terms of like advancing features in Wi-Fi. So I was kind of sad I was like, oh, Almond, I don't know where they are now. Okay. That answers your question, Steve. If you would like us to answer your questions, please give us a call at 512-623-7424, and we will enter you to win a Schlage lock. That's it for this portion of the show, but please stay tuned to hear how California is trying to prepare the way for a dynamic energy grid where your car can talk to the grid, and when it needs to, it can turn itself off or stop charging or charge more when the sun is out. It's really compelling. So stay tuned for Karen Herter, who is going to talk to us from the California Energy Commission about making our grid futuristic and awesome. And now, a message from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from this week's Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Calyx, and I have Michael Veining here with me. Hello, Michael. Can you quickly remind us, who is Calyx?
Calyx is a provider of clouds, software, and systems that enable service providers of all sizes to deliver amazing broadband and Wi-Fi 6 experiences to their subscribers on future-proof and autonomous fiber networks. I'm excited to continue our discussion on the Revenue Edge solution, which is the enabler of our amazing Wi-Fi experiences.
With more people staying at home and using their broadband connection for work, school, and entertainment, a reliable connected experience is more important than ever. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Wi-Fi systems and support that Calyx provides?
Absolutely, Stacy. As I said last week, we believe that the company with the best data wins. So we start by arming service providers with great insights into what their subscriber needs. We do that with Calyx Marketing Cloud, a real-time behavioral analytics engine that helps a service provider understand the subscriber's activities, such as streaming and gaming, or working from home, or doing what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, attending video conference after video conference. By understanding the needs of each household, they can ensure they are providing the right services at the right time. We then arm that service provider with cool Wi-Fi systems. Most subscribers know that to get the latest and greatest router, you have to drop $300 or $400 at the Best Buy because they are not getting it from their local service provider. Not anymore. Calyx was the first to launch carrier-class Wi-Fi 6 18 months ago, and we just released our second-generation Wi-Fi beast, the Blast U6. I'll put a U6 up against any router in the market and will kick butt, something that few service providers have ever had before. Amazing Wi-Fi 6 coverage, fully mesh-enabled, and a big processor to handle the most demanding of tasks, such as local virus and malware protection, or as we announced in October, running Samsung SmartThings to control all your IoT needs. The best thing is that even if there is a problem, the AI engine will self-heal, and if the problem persists, such as an old iPad mucking up your Wi-Fi channels, when you call the service provider using Calyx Support Cloud, they won't tell you to reboot the router. They see everything, have remote control, and can fix issues easily. A great example of the Revenue Edge in action is Allo Communications in Nebraska and Colorado. They're a kick-butt service provider who has an amazing all-fiber network. When they activated our autonomous self-heal, they saw 92% of all Wi-Fi issues get resolved before the subscriber even knew. And when they do call in, they use Calyx Support Cloud to ensure that you get fixed fast. There was a great article written this week in the Lincoln Journal-Star about how locals are abandoning Spectrum in droves to get on the Allo fiber network. If you Google strain on internet services felt as thousands suddenly working and learning from home, you'll see there's lots of quotes about how terrible the experience is on coax, where Allo customers rave that their service is great and their Wi-Fi is fantastic. The CEO of Allo, Brad Moline, says it best. They built for the future, and Calyx is proud to be part of the Allo team during this crisis. One thing's for sure, people need great Wi-Fi and a fiber network more than ever.
Thanks for sharing, Michael. Can you remind people of where they can go to learn more?
If they're a service provider, they can go to calyx.com/revenueedge to learn more. And if they want to learn more about our awesome Blast Wi-Fi 6 systems, I'd encourage them to go to blastwifi.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacy Higginbotham, and today's guest is Karen Herter, who is with the California Energy Commission in the Efficiency Division. And we are here to talk about how we're going to make the electrical grid a little bit more like the internet in terms of doing better, more reactive, more instantaneous demand response. So hi, Karen. How are you today?
Hey there, Stacy. I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent. So I'm really glad that you came on the show because I have this grand vision for electrification and the future of energy when we tie it into IoT, which means we have sensors on everything. We have analysis happening. As a consumer, I've been stoked about this ever since I changed out my LED light bulbs and I was like, woohoo! I'm more efficient. And then I was like, now what do I do? And then I put a device on my breaker box and I had it measuring my energy consumption on different devices. And then I was like, I can't do anything with this data. So I'm hoping you're going to help us through how we get from where we are today to where we want to be. So first, why don't you tell us about what you do and what you're trying to do in California?
Sure. So what I do is I work for the California Energy Commission in the Efficiency Division, and I'm a program manager for the Energy Commission's load management standards. You can think of the load management standards as sort of a cousin to the building and appliance standards, if you're familiar with those in California. And those standards are also housed in the Efficiency Division at the Energy Commission. And what I'm doing right now is what's called the Load Management Rulemaking, or the 2020 Load Management Rulemaking, where I'm working with folks in my office and in my division, and also in the broader California electric industry, including the Public Utilities Commission and the Independent System Operator, and also with many vendors in the IoT realm, to try to figure out how we can make buildings, the commercial sector, the industrial sector, and the residential sector all more responsive to the needs of the electrical grid.
And why do we want this? Not just because it's cool, but...
Not just because it's cool, no. We need some kind of signal, I would say. And so you might think of it as an internet signal, and very likely that's what it will be, at least part of it, to devices that will enable automation. What that automation will enable us to do is to respond to the frequent changes in electricity supply, in particular, wind and solar resources. So as I'm sure you're aware and your audience is aware right now, California has more than 30% renewable carbon-free resources on the grid, and those resources are not available 24 hours a day. In fact, taking solar as an example, it's available, sometime between 6 a.m. and say 8 p.m., right around this time of year. So what we're looking for is a way to not only store some of that load as in battery supply, but also a way to shift some of the loads that we use when the sun is down into the periods when we have free or cheap electricity, meaning when the sun is shining.
Okay, so then the fun part of this is, where are we today and what do we need to get to this point? Because I feel like I said, we're at this place where I in my home can say my oven is using this much, and I do have demand response on my thermostat, for example, but I also have like a Tesla, and I bet you might want demand response on my Tesla, or maybe my hot water heater, which is usually the second largest energy consumer in the home. So first, I guess I should ask, are those the sort of things you would like to have control over?
Oh, absolutely. Those are among the top items we'd not necessarily like to have control over, but that we would like for customers to control. And then the question is, what's the incentive? So there are a few pieces to this. There's the technology, which is what you're talking about. I've got a Tesla, and maybe I have something hooked up to it that can control when it charges. Or I have a thermostat, and it's connected to the Wi-Fi, and I can control it from my phone, and somebody else, I belong to an aggregator program, a DR program, and they control it as they would like to. The second part of it, that's technology. The other part is the incentive. What's in it for you as the customer? Whether you're a big industrial customer, an agricultural water pumping facility, or someone sitting in their home that wants cool air, what's in it for you to shift your load? Maybe a pre-cool starting at 9 in the morning when it's nice and cool outside and your air conditioner can work more efficiently and the sun is shining. So that's an ideal time to start pre-cooling a little bit. And then maybe at 5 o'clock when the peak hits, you let the temperature float up. Most people aren't going to do that. They wouldn't even think that they have any reason to do that. But we need some kind of incentive. And what we think of right now and where we are right now is we pay people to do this. We either give them an upfront incentive, say, here's $25 if you let us install this thermostat and then we control it. Another option is we're going to figure out how much you use now, and then we're going to figure out how much you save, and then we're going to pay you for whatever you don't use anymore. And then the third option, which is one that the Energy Commission has been pursuing for decades now, is we charge you whatever it's worth on the grid. And then all of these other issues go away. We don't have to figure out how much you dropped load, and we don't have to pay you or send you a check. We just provide a rate and allow you to set your own devices to use electricity when electricity is cheap or free, and not use electricity when it's expensive. And ideally, this would happen automatically, right? Nobody wants to sit and look at the price. Well, okay, there's probably a few people out there.
I was going to say my husband would, but you're right. Most of us are going to be like, software, do it for me.
Yes, and ideally you get something from your utility, you plug it in, and it just works. That's it. Maybe you set a few levers and switches to say, I want to be more or less frugal. I want to be more or less comfortable. But ideally, the customer is in control of how their appliances work, not the utility. And I said, ideally the utility would send you, but it could also be just a vendor. You could just go to a hardware store or go online and purchase a product that does this for you. It receives a signal that tells it when the price of electricity is low and when it's high, and that device will be programmed between you and the vendor, who of course has algorithms already pre-programmed in and allows you to change those according to your own preferences. It will automatically respond to the price of electricity in a way that keeps you comfortable and lowers your electricity bill. That's the long-term goal here.
Okay, so it's an awesome goal. I would be excited about it, but you're right. The tech is here on the tech side for the most part. Yes, we need some sort of product that does this, but I feel like we need governments to maybe let utilities have granular pricing insights. My old utility could give me daily energy usage and then peak and non-peak energy usage, and that was the extent of their ability.
That's what we call time of use pricing, and that is generally something that you can write down. It's stable. From this time to this time in this season, the price will be X. And from this time to this time in the same season, the price will be Y. And these might change season to season. That's called a time of use rate. And we don't think of that as a dynamic rate. A dynamic rate is what a lot of people will call real-time pricing. And those dynamic rates allow the utilities to change the price from day to day, from hour to hour, maybe from minute to minute to reflect system conditions.
Okay. And you guys right now in California are trying to do this with a rulemaking procedure. So what are some of the parameters that y'all are trying to build into California's dynamic pricing system?
So what we're trying to do at the Energy Commission is require the top 5 utilities to offer rates to their customers that will allow them to save money by shifting loads using their electric vehicles or their thermostats, or in the case of large customers, their pumping loads. And so when we require the utilities to offer those rates, it's still up to the utility rate approving bodies to approve those rates and to design those rates. But right now we're using this as a platform to focus all of the utilities and the rate approving bodies on this idea that an hourly or sub-hourly signal to automation is a necessary next step to enable response to variable supply on the grid from solar and wind.
Got it. So it sounds like what you're doing is you're saying to these 5 big utilities, hey, we are recommending you do hourly or sub-hourly. And when you say sub-hourly, is this like every minute, every 15 minutes? Do you have a sense of how long that is?
Yes, the standards are generally 15 minutes and 5 minutes, but it's certainly possible that we get to finer resolution in the future.
All right, so you're going to make them give a consumer, be it business or residential, pricing for a select number of devices and the option to sign up for pricing for a select number of devices to be billed on this sub-hourly rate?
Yeah, so it would be a voluntary rate that they would offer to their customers and only give them that rate if the customer asked for it, of course. For the customer, it would depend on which of their loads were meters. It would have to be at the meter because in order to bill on an hourly rate, they would need the hourly consumption in order to multiply it by the hourly rate to get the final bill. So you could imagine that in the future, if meters become small enough, cheap enough, and ubiquitous enough, you could sign up, let's say, as a home, you might say, I want my water heater, my electric vehicle, my home battery, my pool pump, and my hot tub on this rate, but I want the rest of my house on the standard rate. It's a potential future scenario that I can imagine happening, but this is certainly not going to happen in this round of the standards.
And it also might happen that if you have to have it on the outside, like it's at the meter, perhaps I would have a device that is outside of my house, but before the meter, like my circuit breaker box, that's smart and is running these sorts of algorithms that's smarter, basically, and can turn my appliances off inside the home based on the priorities I've set. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. The load management standards are agnostic to where the communications happens. And so it could definitely happen at the circuit breaker. It could happen at the appliance. There is some movement. If you look at Washington State, they've just required that all water heaters have a special port that allows a module that can translate different types of signals so that the utilities can send signals to the water heaters to determine when they're on and when they're off in order to manage the loads. That's at the appliance, but like you say, it could definitely be at the breaker box. The load management standards are quite agnostic about how it's done at this point. At this point, it's really, we want to see these rates put in place, and we want to create some standards about how those rates get communicated to the customers. And beyond that, we're hoping that the market will take over and come up with some really good ideas about how to make use of that signal to manage loads at the site.
Okay. And with this idea of creating standards around communicating the pricing, that's not just how you're telling me, a consumer, about pricing, but it's also how do you tell a device about where the pricing is? And is that going to be like an API, or is that going to be something like OpenADR?
Yeah, we haven't really settled on that yet. And right now we're trying to start with the simpler part, which is to get the rate going and to set up a platform at the Energy Commission that would be based on an API where, to begin with at least, we would have the time of use prices. So the standards include a requirement. And again, these are at this point draft amendments. These are not in place yet. But one of the requirements is for the utilities to, on a monthly basis, send their time of use prices to the Energy Commission, where we can then aggregate them in a central repository of time of use rates that can be accessed through an API. If we have the central repository, then the devices can either access them as they're being built and the firmware is installed, and then potentially be updated either through firmware, or the device could pull that information itself. And again, I'm agnostic on how it works. Our goal is to get the information in a public place where it's available to vendors, to customers, to devices, to whomever wants it.
Okay. So then California, it's a big state, but are there efforts here that would make this maybe federal or even global? Like, how do we move this beyond California if that's indeed possible?
That's a good question. My focus, of course, is California. Well, we're looking at the possibility of using OpenADR as a potential standard, either this year or in a future version of the load management standards. And that is an IEC standard. And so that is one possible way of broadening this effort. Another option that we're thinking of for publishing the hourly rate, once those are out in a few years, is through FM broadcast. And we've had interest and bids from vendors who are capable of doing this. They work with public radio stations to set up a server that receives the OpenADR pricing signals or directly from the utility. And then the FM station broadcasts that signal out to every building in its reach, right? And so with a very few number of public radio stations, you can broadcast an hourly or 15-minute or 5-minute signal to the entire state within seconds. That's a platform that we're seriously looking at. We're getting some information on what that would cost to do, and it doesn't look like it would be very expensive at all. And if that were so, then you could imagine that customers could, say, purchase very cheap, we're talking single-digit dollars modules, or like you've suggested, they could put in their panel, and this will all depend on pricing, to receive an FM signal so that they could respond to these prices.
And just to be clear, this FM signal is it analog or data?
It's data. Yeah, it's the digital portion of the FM broadcast that can be used. So if you have a newer car that has a digital, display, and it will tell you what station you're listening to, who's playing, what the song is, and other information. So that's called radio data system, RDS or RDBS, depending on whether you're in Europe or in the United States. And that digital portion of the FM airwaves can also be used to send pricing signals. And it has been done in pilots in the past. The Sacramento Municipal Utility District did a pilot back in, I think, 2009, and I was involved in helping them create this FM broadcast signal that went out to about 70 different small businesses that told them when a critical peak price was happening at the utility. And then at that time, we were just working with thermostats. It was quite early in the IoT days. And so those thermostats would respond by pre-cooling. They'd get a day-ahead signal. They would pre-cool the building before the peak period. And then during the peak period, they would go up by 2 or 4 degrees, depending on what the customer chose. And that used FM broadcast to a thermostat. But you could imagine the FM broadcast could be used by any device, really, especially if there were a receiver on the outside of the home that were transmitted to the inside. There are many, many different ways to use a signal like that. But the nice thing about FM broadcast is it reaches almost every single building in the state at very low cost.
Awesome. Okay. And then final question for you. How long is all of this going to take?
Yeah, I hope it's closer to 5 years. At least what we're doing right now, we're hoping to have it finished by the end of the year, which means the time of use rate repository at the Energy Commission could start as soon as next year. The hourly pricing portion wouldn't start for a few years. The utilities and their rate-making bodies would need to design the rates and approve the rates. Beyond that, they're hopefully within a couple of years, then that would happen, and soon afterwards they would be broadcast. So if we can get hourly rates broadcast within the next few years, our goal is that the markets would see that they would anticipate this happening and start to design devices that can respond to these rates, that can shift loads automatically for customers. I can't envision that it would need to be more than some of the largest pumping facilities, some of the commercial buildings. It doesn't need to be everyone, is the nice thing. It can be the largest load. Even if we could just get electric vehicles on this rate and responding to this rate, that would be a huge part of what we need, assuming that electric vehicles are going to become as popular as people have said. So I would say within 10 years is a reasonable timeline to have, I think, as much demand flexibility as we need. Again, it's hard to say, especially these days. Things can change so quickly, but that would be my goal within 10 years.
Excellent. All right. Karen, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.